Welcome to the Mobile Workforce Podcast, where we sit down and have real conversations with business leaders that have been where you are. During these interviews, we'll dive into what it takes to improve systems and champion processes that maximize performance. Each week, our trailblazing guests share their experiences and understanding of the workforce to help inspire change, challenge our thinking, and share what it takes to successfully travel the road to profitability. Now here's our host, co-founder and chief evangelist of About Time and WorkMax, Mike Merrill.
Hello and welcome to the Mobile Workforce Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Merrill, and today we are sitting down with David Campbell. David is an application specialist at TopCon Solutions, a leading provider of AEC technology and training. He is also the host of the Brewing with BIM, a pretty cool podcast that's a lot of fun to listen to. And David has a wealth of knowledge on implementation, data management, and also workforce education. So today we're going to talk about data collection and what is considered common data that's collected, as well as how these two things improve construction projects. So David, welcome to the podcast today. Excited to have you on.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So one of the things that I mentioned a minute ago, you have some oversight or some connection to training for a job site. So how does your job and training relate to implementations of new technologies?
Well, so typically what I do is I would introduce people to the technology, do demonstrations, things like that, get everybody kind of warmed up to the idea with lunch and learns. There's many different approaches that we can use for it. But at the end of the day, what we end up doing is figuring out what's best for the company in terms of the implementation and of what software. I use, BIM 360 or the Autodesk Construction Cloud, Revit, Recap, a lot of different, tools. It just, again, kind of depends on what that company is trying to achieve. But at the end of the day, when we're looking at an implementation for a company, it has to be a phased or kind of tiered approach, right? We're looking at the different positions that would, benefit from what parts, right? If we're looking at project managers versus a project engineer or a design engineer, they're going to use the software a little bit differently. Well, I'm trying to step over myself there, but they're going to use it a little bit differently than each other, right? So we have to really figure out exactly how it's going to benefit them.
Yeah, what's interesting, you mentioned, sounds like you're dealing with trainings for different people in different roles that would have a different, unique perspective. So how do you balance that in the trainings to make sure everybody gets what they need and their takeaways are helpful for their position?
Oh, I tell them to ask questions. Yeah, I mean, the questions are huge. A lot of people, when you get into a training session, some people will be scared that, they're going to miss something or they'll want to wait until the end to ask questions. I usually tell everyone that I teach right up front, ask your questions. Don't let me steamroll you with this data, because there's a lot of information that you're going to learn in a class, especially if it's a 2 or 3 day class. It can be very overwhelming. And to try and balance it a little bit, typically what I do is I like to get a good scope call first before the training even goes, right? We got to get that scope. Once we have that scope and we have that agreed upon kind of agenda, then we'll go into the class. And me being an instructor, the agenda tells me what I need to cover during that class. But at the same time, it benefits you as an instructor to know who's in your class. And, as you're getting to know the different personas, you start getting an idea of the directions or exercises that we can do during that class to kind of start bridging it between everyone, right? Because, of course, one piece doesn't fit everybody.
Right. It makes great sense. So are there some common themes that you hear people asking at the beginning of a lot of these classes? Are there some parallels depending on the audience?
Yeah. I mean, some of them will ask, why am I here? That's always a good one.
A different situation.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, in some ways they'll ask, how is this going to benefit me? What is this doing for me and my team? And honestly, the first part of a class I've found is kind of feeling each other out, in the sense of, you want to establish yourself as a knowledgeable instructor, but at the same time, you have to be essentially you have to do some give and some take, right? In terms of you have to learn from them at the same time. You
Okay.
have to communicate and be open with that communication, to learn not only what they're doing, but how they're doing it. Because if you just go in and try to teach them, like, let's say you're doing a Revit class and I'm just going to show you 3 days of Revit,
Hmm.
it could be overwhelming and they could leave the class feeling like they haven't really learned anything that's going to benefit them with their position. So right up front, it's usually good to get that out and to ask, hey, what is your goal with this class? What at the end of the third day, if if you could learn one thing and it would make you happy, what would that be? And you're not trying to get, hey, I'm just going to go ahead and teach that person that and this is going to be an easy class.
Right.
No, what we're really trying to do in that sense is to figure out, okay, what is most important to you and what are the steps that we need to take to kind of get there, right? um, I've often found that a lot of people will ask if it's a BIM 360 class,
Hmm.
or if it's a Revit class, they'll start asking about how do I how do I start getting other people within my company to use this? How are others that do the same thing I do? How are other mechanical engineers or project managers? How do they use this program?
Hmm.
That's a very common question because a lot of times people don't know what they don't know,
Right.
and we want to be able to show them. But at the same time, you don't want to open up the floodgates right all at one time because it's like drinking water from a fire hose. It can be too much.
Right. Yeah, I love. I'm gathering from what you're saying. There's always a learning curve, and it could vary depending on the person or their role. But I think that's a great insight for people to understand going in. This is going to take some time. This isn't going to just roll itself out and jump up and start tap dancing on the desk as soon as you install the system or connect up to the cloud. Right.
Yes, sir. Yeah, there's always a learning curve with it. And, one of the things that I've talked about in my industry, because, it's training. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people will feel like, okay, well, we bought the software. Why do we want to spend more money on training? Well, because the way to look at it is there's always a learning curve, always. Now, there is a way to shorten that learning curve, but there's still going to be the curve, right? There's still going to be, after training, you have to take it and not only, think about what you learned in training, but translate in that into how you're going to use it every day. How are we going to use it on our projects? How are we going to use it? Are we going to start on the existing projects that we have today, or is this a future, like we have another project coming in that we want to go ahead and spearhead this on? And a lot of times I find that's very beneficial for companies to do in terms of starting with a new project, because it helps them find those little nuances that are kind of a pain, or the workarounds that they need to do, generate questions about how do we do this specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Because in that sense, it's not, if you're already in a project, usually it's everybody 100%. It's like a fire drill, right? We're trying to get it
Mm-hmm.
out. We're trying to get it done. But if you have some time with a new project coming up where you can slow things down a little bit, it's usually pretty beneficial to start there and then go ahead and figure out what, road bumps or speed bumps, let's say, what
Yeah.
speed bumps are kind of obstacles that you might approach and how to get around that. That's going to be part of the learning curve as well, right? It's fully implementing the software, but not just to a point of where you're using it. It's where you're
Mm.
using it and excelling with it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm really hearing two different themes there. The first one is you really have to have a keen focus on that number one goal or what's most important for your role. And then number two, you have to have an open mind and be flexible to kind of take in what other benefits that you can add to that main goal. Would that be right?
Yes, sir. Exactly. Yeah. Having an open mind is huge. A lot of people need to, I would say they don't need to, but it's a good idea to take a step
Mhm.
back and open up your mind to how is this going to change what I do currently, right? I
Mhm.
do find that in some classes, some people have been very stuck with their process and the way they do it currently. And okay, that's great. It works for you. But that may not be how this new software works. Now, we can do the same thing. It's just a different way of thinking, right? And in that sense, when we can open their minds and start looking at, okay, we've always done it this way, but let's go ahead and try it this way and see what happens. A lot of times once we get that adoption or that mindset kind of set, right, it's a little bit easier in terms of communicating and really to, I guess, get into the software itself. It's really where you're one track minded, where you get that pushback saying, well, we've always done it this way. Why should we change
Mhm.
it?
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. So I know, TopCon, obviously a huge company. Go to the big trade shows, Con Expo or World of Concrete. You guys have huge booths. There's all kinds of really cool tech. But when I boil it down and I think of TopCon, I think of data. I think you guys just gather a lot of data. What is it about that that's so important, or what should companies be prioritizing with the data that they're looking to collect or that they should be collecting?
Well, I would say the amount of data and how you're using it, right? Like these great scanners that we have. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of times, I mean, laser scanners are awesome and they will generate you a nice full picture or an as built conditions of a building or a site, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times people will stop there. And the problem with that is you have all of this data that you can use in more ways than one, but you don't. In the sense of, if we can use it to generate surfaces to know what our cuts and fills are going to be, or
Mm-hmm.
if we know that something existing needs to be moved or we're going to reuse it in the actual model itself, having that data available to you, knowing where the pipes are running through your buildings or the utilities are coming in, different things like that, they're very beneficial to have. But kind of pushing it to that next level as well is making sure that everyone in that project has access to the data, right? That's going to be your biggest thing, is not only visualization into the project but access, whether it's, I like to say my common data environment, right? That gives
Mm-hmm.
everybody that access point to find that data and to essentially dive into it and use it how they need to, because of course different positions are going to translate that data differently.
Well, yeah, and you're talking about all these different data types, and what comes to mind for me is I'm thinking, some like a project manager might need data on a daily basis to make sure the job's running smoothly, but maybe the HR or legal department, if you're a large enough company, they've got a whole different goal with this. This is all about reducing risk and liability. So that data may be far more critical in the end than the project manager's data, but it's only utilized when there's a problem. So I think understanding the importance of why, which you mentioned, is the key to all of this, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a great point that you bring up. A great example as well, because we start looking at construction projects during COVID times, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And a lot of times, like the laser scans, again, for example, they'll be used to kind of generate that picture of what's going on or what those as-built existing conditions are. But we're starting to see them, used more for also safety. They can generate safety
Mm-hmm.
issues, or they're using it to track construction progress. And in terms of, if we start talking about accounting, if you're looking at paying for different projects or different, I can't remember what I was going to call it, but essentially your different assemblies that are being installed on the site as your subcontractors come out. If they do
Mm-hmm.
one portion of the work, we're going to go ahead and pay them for it. Well, we want to
Right.
evaluate that and essentially make sure that everything is the way we specified. So this data can be used by so many different people in so many different ways. We just have to figure out how to interpret it.
Hmm. And of course, you got to collect it in the first place in order to
Yeah,
even know.
that's it. Yes, sir. It has to be there.
So at what point does somebody who's implemented a new technology or a new solution, at what point can they say, okay, this now has become a valuable tool and I'm glad we did it when this implementation was successful? Are there benchmarks or things that you could, checkpoints you could point out?
Yeah. So a lot of times what we'll do is we roadmap with our clients or with our customers and figure out where they are now and where they want to be. Okay. And essentially what we do with that is kind of, as you're saying there, we do a phased approach to, I don't know if it's generally a month or two after they've been using the project, after they've been using the software, we do a check-in and we'll say, hey, what are your questions? How are you guys doing with your projects? Do you guys need any screen shares? That's
Mm,
another kind of service that we'll offer, is jump in and do project-based consulting with a screen share and say, okay, these are the issues that we're running into. Generally, I would say 6 months to a year down the road, they're already full steam ahead, and
okay.
they're just trying to push it in new ways at that point, in terms of figuring out how else can we use this and who can use it.
Yeah.
A lot of times I'll work with general contractors, and they'll start design build. Well, their design engineers are using it for drafting, but the field personnel have also found a use for creating their schedules, or their bill of materials, generating that quick information, or being able to just jump into the model and take measurements and dimensions. Is very valuable for them, right?
Mm.
So it's again kind of checking in and seeing, okay, is the communication here open, and how else can, let's say, we use this data in what ways?
Yeah, it's like running financial reports. I mean, you don't need to know necessarily certain things every day, but once a week would be really nice. Monthly's got to be probably minimum, but if you don't look at your finances but twice a year, I mean, I hope it's going well, right?
Yeah, right. That could be bad juju.
So lots of data types, lots of roles that need to leverage that data. I mentioned at the top the term common data. What would you say would be some common data points that you would consider that fit that definition?
Well, so again, kind of from the TopCon perspective, I'll use a lot of the Autodesk, like BIM 360 or the
Hmm.
Construction Cloud. We've also seen Box, Dropbox, Citrix.
Yep.
It's an environment. It's an area where all of the team members, project stakeholders, can go to access this information. And there's so many different kinds out there. My biggest point with it, though, is of course figuring out what works for your company, but also staying connected. That's a huge
Okay.
piece with all of this. If your models are updating and you can't see them as they've updated, are they valuable? Right? If you're
Sure.
creating RFIs, if you're creating submittals, if you're creating issues, or even if you're doing clash detection and coordination with a model or with a project, is it connected? If
Mm,
you're trying to use two or three different softwares and you're trying to, bring everything together, you need to have it in a common data environment, whether, it's folder structures or what have you. You need to have it available for the different stakeholders, in the sense of, yes, the RFI is going to be valuable for the contractor, for the architect, the engineer, what have you, but they're also going to be valuable for the owner, and for any owner's reps or anyone financing the project, to see what's going on and why are they behind schedule? Why are they applying for this change order? Why is this happening? If you can really start getting that paper trail, right, and
mhm.
establishing the connection between that data, it starts really helping everyone in the project to get on the same page, and it helps those decisions get made sooner.
That's critical. Quicker decisions made better, right?
Hmm.
So just for clarity, the term common data, I mean, someone might hear that and think, oh, well, that's just common data. That's data that everybody has. But what you're talking about is data that is common among each stakeholder and everybody has access to. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Okay. All right. So that's great. I love the idea of that visibility across your team, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, and it's very important. I mean, for all of the different projects going on today, whether they're small residential or they're bigger
Mhm.
commercial, to have that connectivity, to have that common environment where everyone that's involved in the project can go into. I mean, as I said, even residential with homeowners, being able to go in and look at that 3D model of their home and look at the different materials and be able to provide input with what's going on with that house. I mean, it's very valuable for a contractor as well as, an owner.
Love it. So what I've heard you talk in the past about, I think this relates to what we were just talking about a digital twin. What does that term mean and why is that actually important?
Well, digital twin has kind of been a buzzword in our industry for a little bit, but
Mhm.
what we've found is that the digital twin is when you have a full let's say, digital copy of that model or that building, right? Of the
Hmm.
site, of the building, what have you. The reason why it's important to have a digital twin is to, again, give everyone visualization or the capability of visualization into that project, into the building, into the site. And this doesn't just start and stop at, owners or the design engineers, the drafts people, whatever. It doesn't really stop there. There are so many different ways to look at this in terms of usage. Whether it's facilities management, your maintenance team needs to look at an air handling unit and find the warranty information that goes along with it, or who replaced these different parts last, or if a piece of equipment, a pump, has been replaced. It's important to know that, not just, of course, for keeping the building as it is, but if that owner in 10 or 15 years wants to update it, if they want new construction to happen, or they're going to sell that building and they want to actually hand this off to
Right.
someone else, being able to hand over a digital twin in the
Hmm.
sense of, you're handing over this full 3D model that has all of your assets in it, all the piping, everything's modeled and tracked and updated. That's a very valuable thing to be able to hand over to someone. And
Sure.
I mean, I'm actually going to talk about this tonight, my tap tour presentation I got going on, but 80% of the buildings in the United States are over 20 years old.
Uh-huh.
And in saying that, 80% is a pretty high number to think about when you start looking at, do we have as-built drawings for those? Are they in CAD?
Mhm.
Are they paper? Or most of the time when I was working in architecture, I wouldn't have anything to start with. I'd go find a paper roll, but it
Yep.
was all tattered and falling apart. It's hard
Right.
to really start translating what's in that building. And then you don't know what's in the walls. You don't know what's above the
Right.
ceiling, if anything's been added. It's really difficult to really get your feet under you for this project. And I mean, yeah, that's on T&I jobs, but at the same time, as we're finding in construction, most of our projects are T&I. We're doing a lot of rehab to bring up our current, our current infrastructure, but the current,
Infrastructure.
yeah. I mean, our current buildings or what have you that we have today. A lot of times it costs so much money to be able to build a new building, but it's even costing more to go into a T&I job because there's unknowns.
Yeah.
And if we can really start getting rid of the unknowns and arming people with that information or that data to make the best decisions that they can, whether they're purchasing the building or they're wanting to restore it, or they're just wanting to go through and update different things in their building.
Well, I've got to believe that if you're talking 20 years ago, I mean, we were just starting in business and collecting data on Palm Pilots, disconnected, no such thing as Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth even.
Yeah. Yep.
So I don't believe that 90% of the buildings that are 20 years old or older have anything digital other than maybe the blueprints, right?
Yep. Yep.
So it's a great point you make, and very, very interesting statistic. So when you talk about T&I, just for the listeners that don't understand, what does that acronym refer to?
Oh, essentially, it's going into a building and rehabbing it, right? I call it T&I, but I cannot think of what the acronym exactly stands for. But I've always known it as restoring or rehabbing a building.
Got it.
And
Okay.
yeah, I can't for some reason I'm blanking out
Put you
on
on
the.
the spot there.
Yeah, that's it. But yeah, it's restoring or rehabbing an existing building.
Okay, got it. So one of the things, of course, when I hear you talking about this sharing of data, we're talking about cloud technology, obviously. And I know that, I mean, this comes up a lot on our podcast and a lot of the other podcasts for construction and technology that I listen to. There's still companies out there that are resistant to the cloud or have concerns. Is there anything you would say to them that you feel like might resonate a little bit better than maybe some of the information that they've had in the past if they're still not a believer?
Yes and no. I would say that, in some ways, you're not going to change a person's mindset if they completely distrust it, right?
Right.
Now,
Okay.
I could tell you that most things are on like Amazon web servers, right?
Right.
Okay. And at that point, hey, do you buy things from Amazon? Do you give them your credit card information? Do you trust
Right.
Amazon to, hold your credit card information, deliver your stuff to your house and not end up taking everything that you have? Well, at the same time, I think it's becoming more and more standard, honestly, to use cloud processes nowadays, right? I mean, you're seeing companies like Bluebeam or Autodesk who are both actually hosting data on the Amazon web servers. Now, they've
Mm.
both actually been certified by, I can't remember exactly what the certification was. It was from the government. They've actually been certified.
Talk to maybe
Yes,
compliance or
yes, actually, that is it. They've gotten that the compliance certification to host that data on their servers.
sure.
So, in saying that, it's secure. If the government is going to utilize it, it's secure. Well, okay. maybe
on,
maybe
on
there's
paper.
on paper, right? Yeah, let's maybe take that one just back a little bit, but I mean, it's new, right? And let's say this, that the cloud technology itself is not as new, but pushing all of your data up to the cloud, it is this new idea that is really coming out big in the AEC industry because everybody wants to be kept up on the same page, right? Everybody wants to know that when this MEP model updates and they had a clash where one of my pipes was going through a column, has that been updated? If it has been
Right.
updated, how did they update it? If this pipe was
Right.
going through this HVAC duct, have they dropped it down? Have they put it over? We need to know
Mhm.
what happens. So the fact that, I guess this is the other kind of point I wanted to make, is we need to look at how having that cloud connectivity benefits us at the same time,
Right.
right? Because we're always doing that balancing act.
Yeah.
Yes, we want to make sure everything is secure. We have to. We don't want to leave anything out so it gets stolen. But we also want to make sure that it's going to be beneficial for us to use in a way that is going to better what we can deliver and
Right.
better our turnaround times.
Yeah, it's the old risk versus reward argument about making any decision. If the value of moving this direction is greater and the benefits are greater than the potential risk or the cost of staying the same, which what we know and we see, and I think most companies are understanding now, if you're behind technologically from your peers in construction, you're going to have a really hard time competing, right?
Yes.
And especially when it comes to the workforce. You hand a clipboard to some kid that just graduated with a construction management degree out of college, and he's going to look at you cross-eyed and want to throw it back at you. He's not going to know what to do with it, right?
No. Like, where's my iPad?
Yeah, right. Yep. So back to, we talking about the cloud technology. We're talking about this T&I jobs having I mean, I come to, in my mind, I come to think of a owner manual of your vehicle,
Hmm.
right? I mean, something that you can reference back to as it relates to that building. So that would be an argument for the cloud. When there's an update, when there's been a rehab done, or when there's been new work completed or an addition, you've got that documentation of not just what, but when and why and how, so that when there's something else that needs to be done, you can reference back to that and have that most current information.
Yes, sir.
Love that. So what about avoiding unnecessary redesigns, or making something actually worse off after trying to improve it? Is there any track on that we can talk about as it relates
Yeah,
to?
actually, so kind of going back to where we were with the cloud technologies and weighing your benefits versus risk, right? In terms of redesigns, it's typically done when there's a breakdown of communication, right?
Mhm.
Or
Yeah.
there's a lack of communication. And what we're seeing with the push to the cloud is that it really is enhancing visualization, communication, and collaboration with different project teams and stakeholders. Um, what we're seeing is that it actually gives us the capability to remove the that need to go back for the redesign or that constructability review because it's
Mhm.
incorporated, right? Well, kind of tying back to my previous point of staying connected, right? If we can keep all of this data in a, let's say, a common data environment and keep it connected in the sense of knowing when the RFIs come up, knowing why they come up, or if there's an issue that's generated from the model, if we have someone that is knowledgeable, whether they're an engineer or a contractor that gets involved with this project, let's say sooner in the process, rather than later, a lot of times they'll be able to generate that insightful, communication or those issues to say, hey, this isn't constructible, this isn't going to work like that. And if we can get to that point of where all those stakeholders are actively engaged in the project, in this environment, within this model to tell you, okay, this is where our current utilities are, this is where we're coming in, this is what we need, you're going to help. Because I mean, a lot of times in our industry, one of the biggest things, and you'll hear this complaint across the board, when you're going from architecture or let's say conceptual design or construction documents, even over into what's actually going to be constructed, there is a big gap, right? A lot of times these construction companies will say, we have to redesign this model because the architect took it to, this level of detail, and they don't know how this building is going to be constructed. So we actually have to build our model to how it's going to be constructed, which is a huge waste of time and energy. And at that point, it's like, if we could get people involved earlier in the process to see what's going on and share or communicate that information, that knowledge that they have, right? These drafts people may not know exactly how it needs to be built. But if you can get that contractor or that engineer involved and to say, I'm looking at you at your drawings as you're going through detailing, and I notice something, let's go ahead and bring up an issue there and say, hey, this isn't how it's done. I'm going to send you a drawing with, even if you hand draw it on a napkin, you could draw something up in Bluebeam with some lines and some symbols, right? Just to be able to give them the insight or that visual into how it's supposed to be done. It benefits everyone involved, and especially the project.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the big thing with all of this, it's similar in my mind to a handshake agreement or verbal discussion agreement versus something written and documented.
Yes,
And
sir.
the plans are a documentation of what is to be built and how it's to be built. And if we can update those as renovations or additions are made or changes, whether it be mid-construction or 20 years down the line, like we were talking, it would be critical to have that documented so everybody, like you said, is working from literally the same page, right?
Yes, sir. Yep.
That's great. So a couple of quick, more personal questions. So what's something that you are most grateful for in your professional life?
That's a good one. I am grateful for the opportunity to really get out and work with so many different people and so many different personas from the construction industry. I've been very grateful to work with, big companies out in the Pacific Northwest to, big companies in Indiana. It's interesting because you start seeing the differences in technology or how they're using it across, even just from the West Coast to the Midwest. And that to me has been so valuable to be able to have the conversations to see, okay, how is this person using it versus how is this person, and what is beneficial to them versus what is beneficial to, project manager, draftsman, what have you. I've been grateful to be involved with this technology as it really builds, I guess, on my passion for construction. I love construction and I do love helping people. And in my mind, the technology and I guess the people really help bring it together, right? And that's really what makes this so fun to do, is that we can utilize this technology to really help owners, get better buildings or get, GCs to deliver projects on time and on budget, or if it's helping architects and drafts personnel to be able to speed up the things that they do within the program to generate these drawings faster, so they're not, staying up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning trying to get a bid set out by 6 a.m. the next day. So if you can help someone, by teaching them, it's a great feeling.
Cool. Yeah, giving back, right?
Yep.
Adding. All right. One more question. So, what is David Campbell's superpower?
Ah, dude, my memory. I'd say that's
Yeah.
yeah, for some reason, I don't know why, but I can remember a lot of stuff and it's been nice because, especially as I'm getting into the new software or as new things release, if it catches my eye, I'm on it. I'm all over it and I can't forget it. I can't forget it. So that's
Good
been
or bad, I
that's
guess,
cool.
right?
Yeah, right. That's it.
You don't hold grudges, do you?
No, right.
Cool. That's great. Yeah, memory. What a great asset and resource. I'm sure it served you well. So, all right. Lastly, main takeaway for the listeners today.
So I'd say the main takeaway is to be open to technology, right? Open to new doors opening. Understand that there is going to be a learning curve with any new technology that you go to implement. Don't approach it thinking that it's going to be the same stuff different day.
Mhm.
And when you're really looking at this different technology or this hardware, software, what have you, start looking at the big picture. Don't just think, how is this going to affect me on this project or, these next two projects? Start looking at how can this help us get better and compete more or compete better, right? We really want to be able to, when you want to build your company, when you want to, essentially build on the offerings that you have, it is good to think about the data that you can get, but also in what ways you can utilize that data. How do you optimize it? Whether it's taking a scan and sending it through, verification, or it's scan to BIM where you're creating a BIM model from the scan, or, even if it's safety, positioning, or, accounts payable, whatever it
Mhm.
is, figure out how anyone in your company can utilize it. That's going to be a huge key for you, is not just looking at, let's say, the construction of it, right? Because construction is so much more than just building the building. It's paying for that building. It's making sure the utilities are good. It's making sure all the coordination is done. There's so many different pieces that go into it. Start looking at how, this can help you as a whole, not just one department, as a whole.
Well said. I love that. That's great. Well, thank you so much for this insightful and enjoyable conversation today, David. I really enjoyed talking with you and having you on.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, thank you very much. It was a great conversation, and I look forward to continuing working with you guys.
Sounds great. Well, we'll definitely connect up again down the road. So, all right. Thank you to the listeners also today for joining David and I on the Mobile Workforce Podcast, sponsored by About Time Technologies and WorkMax. If you enjoyed the conversation that David and I had today or gained some valuable insights, please rate and review the episode as well as the podcast generally. And of course, as always, share this with your friends and colleagues. After all, I know I can speak for David and also myself in stating that not only do we want to help you improve your business, but your life.